Welcome back to Black Poets Then and Now. My name is Kara Roseborough, and today we're talking about renowned Harlem Renaissance poet, novelist, and playwright Countee Cullen. Countee Cullen, born Countee Leroy Porter, was born in 1903. His exact birthplace isn't known. It's speculated that he was either born in New York, Baltimore, or Louisville. There aren't a lot of records in general about Cullen's early childhood. It is known that he lost his parents and his brother when he was young and was raised by his grandmother until around his teen years when she passed away. After that, he was taken in by Carolyn Bell and Reverend Frederick A. Cullen. The Reverend was a minister at the renowned Salem Methodist Episcopal Church in Harlem. Cullen attended high school at the DeWitt Clinton High School, where he was the editor of the school's newspaper and the school's literary magazine, to which he also submitted work. While in high school, Cullen won a citywide poetry contest. Cullen went on to attend New York University. In 1923, he won second prize in the Winter Undergraduate Poetry Contest, which was sponsored by the Poetry Society of America. He entered the contest again the following year, also getting second prize. And the year after that, in 1925, he won first place. During his collegiate studies, Cullen published work in national periodicals such as Harper's, Crisis, Opportunity, The Bookman, and Poetry. He began to establish a national reputation for himself. After graduating from NYU in 1925, he went on that fall to attend Harvard University for their master's program in English. He graduated the following year in 1926. Cullen published his first collection of poems, Color, in 1925. The collection generally focused on Black identity, Black beauty, and injustices the Black community faced in America, and it featured some of his most iconic poems, Heritage, Incident, and Yet Do I Marvel. Yet Do I Marvel is often singled out for structurally showing influences from William Wordsworth and William Blake, while having a completely different subject matter. The entire collection was written in a traditional style and was critically acclaimed. It put Countee Cullen on the map and is to this day considered one of the literary landmarks of the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance was in a philosophical conversation with the Negritude movement happening in France. The Negritude movement was very much about Black values and Black consciousness, and Cullen was very much of the mindset that while poetry itself is raceless, the Harlem Renaissance was very much about the awakening of Black consciousness and the Black modernist movement. He was interacting with Harlem Renaissance greats such as Duke Ellington and poet Langston Hughes. Hughes was actually a critic, oftentimes, of Cullen's work on a philosophical level, but always admired Cullen's craftsmanship and acknowledged the significance of Cullen's contribution to the literary canon emerging at that time. After the Harlem Renaissance, Cullen's work thematically moved away from race and instead focused more on idyllic beauty and other more classical romantic subjects. During the Harlem Renaissance, Cullen published 4 collections of poetry. Color, published in 1925, The Ballad of the Brown Girl and Copper Sun, both published in 1927, and The Black Christ and Other Poems, published in 1929. The Ballad of the Brown Girl and Copper Sun were thematically along the same lines as Color, although they were not as critically acclaimed and well received. The Black Christ and Other Poems received criticism for Cullen's use of religious imagery, and specifically his poem, The Black Christ, came under fire for his comparison between a lynched Black man and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. In 1928, Cullen received the Guggenheim Fellowship, which allowed him to write and study abroad, and between 1928 and 1934, he traveled back and forth between the US and France. In the early 1930s, Cullen's reputation as a poet began to wane. In 1932, he published his one and only adult novel, One Way to Heaven. Cullen spent the rest of his career writing plays that were mostly adaptations of books by other writers and teaching English, French, and creative writing at the Frederick Douglass Junior High School. Cullen struggled in his personal life. While he never explicitly stated his sexual orientation, and historians haven't defined it, it is known that he had relationships with both men and women. He was under the guidance of writer and philosopher Alain Locke, also part of the Harlem Renaissance. Locke wanted to see an emergence of LGBTQ writers during that time, showing a diversity in voices. Cullen went on to marry W.E.B. Du Bois' daughter, Yolande, in 1923, and what ended up being the wedding of the decade among the Black elite. While married to Yolande, Cullen had a relationship with Harold Jackman, whom he remained close to throughout his life. This put a strain on his marriage with Yolande and caused them to divorce. After his divorce and after his relationship with Jackman, Cullen had various other relationships with men and women that were not very successful or didn't last very long, but he did end up marrying Ida Mae Roberson, whom he remained happily married to until he died. Cullen died at just 42 years old of high blood pressure and uremic poisoning. He left behind an incredible legacy, not only artistically, but one that actively sought to unite America and bring racial harmony while ultimately transcending race. It was always important to Cullen to be an artist first and a poet first. Like I said, he always found that poetry itself was raceless, but it was important to him to acknowledge and honor his Black identity. Today, we look at how those themes and intentions came through in his poem, From the Dark Tower.
We shall not always plant while others reap the golden increment of bursting fruit, not always countenance abject and mute that lesser men should hold their brothers cheap. Not everlasting while others sleep shall we beguile their limbs with mellow flute, not always bend to some more subtle brute. We were not made to eternally weep. The night whose sable breast relieves the stark white stars is no less lovely being dark, and there are buds that cannot bloom in all in light but crumble piteous and fall. So in the dark we hide the heart that bleeds and wait and tend our agonizing seeds.
All right, let's unpack. Before we get to anything else in the poem, I just want to take a chance to look at the title, From the Dark Tower, and ask you, who is the speaker? And why is their position significant as they say the things that they're saying to the reader, as they speak to the collective we, thereby including us, the reader, in their rallying cry, as it were? I'll leave that with you. We'll talk about it a little bit after our analysis. Moving on to the first line. We shall not always plant while others reap. We won't always have to do the work while others take the credit for it or receive the benefits. With the full phrase being, we shall not always plant while others reap, the golden increment of bursting fruit. And golden increment, golden being kind of like of the highest standard, increment, a unit of measure, and then fruit being the product that is produced from this work. So the fruit is the best indicator of the quality of work being done. And his use of golden here, and given contextually some of the other work that Cullen did, I thought of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That message, that call for equality that was so important for Cullen. Could just be a coincidence. Maybe he was subtly hinting at that with golden increment, golden rule. In line 3, he says, not always countenance, abject, mute. Countenance, so not always there to be of assistance, to aid, to help. Abject, not always without dignity or self-abasing. And then mute, silent. And then he goes on to say that lesser men should hold their brothers cheap. So if we're starting with we won't always have to be in this lesser position where we can be taken advantage of and that other men may take us for granted. I'll go ahead and finish out the rest of the stanza here. Cullen says, not everlasting while others sleep shall we beguile their limbs with mellow flute, not always bend to some more subtle brute. We were not made to eternally weep. So in this, while others are resting, not doing the work, kind of kicking it back, we are not meant to comfort them. We are not meant to bend to some subtle brute. I love this phrase of subtle brute. I think while slavery had ended, it was very clear the injustices that Black people were facing at the time that he was writing this. and that while that very pervasive brutality of slavery was over, there were still many lingering effects, even physical effects, not just mental, emotional, psychological, and legal, that Black people had to face. Moving on to the second stanza, he says, "The night whose subtle sable breast relieves the stark white stars," going on to line 2, "is no less lovely being dark." I looked at this line quite a bit. So the night whose sable breast, first of all, sable, shout out vocabulary-wise to our first episode with Phyllis Wheatley, so sable here meaning black rather than the animal. The night whose sable breast relieves the stark white stars. So the blackness breaking up the whiteness of the stars, breaking up the shine, is no less lovely being dark. So we can admire the beauty of the white stars and admire the beauty of the black night sky. Obviously a metaphor for admiring people of different races. We don't have to value one and should not value one over the other. He goes on to say, "And there are buds that cannot bloom at all in light but crumble piteous and fall." So not every kind of flower is meant to bloom in light. Not everything that is great comes from lightness or whiteness. Many great things come from darkness or blackness as well. And then he finishes out by saying, "So in the dark we hide the heart that bleeds and wait and tend our agonizing seeds." This is a call for patience. It is leaving the reader with a sense of hope. And by saying that we hide the heart, it's not that you don't feel, rather that you acknowledge it and you hide it away in the hopes that something better is ahead with that patience. I want to comment for just a moment on the structure of the poem. So take a look. You have 2 stanzas. You have a longer one and a shorter one. The first one has an ABBA, ABBA rhyme scheme, followed by, in the second stanza, CC, DD, and EE. This is an Italian sonnet. It's a 14-line poem, and sonnets are typically written in iambic pentameter, which this one is. You have no stress and stress, no stress and stress in each of the lines. Coming back to my original question at the start of our analysis, who is the speaker? We can say that it's Cullen. He doesn't explicitly state Countee Cullen, but we can say that it's Cullen. But I think more importantly than who is the speaker, we should look at where the speaker is speaking from, this dark tower. My mind goes to Lord of the Rings, but don't think that Cullen was talking about Lord of the Rings. Instead, I think it's important to note that from this dark tower, the speaker serves as a watchman, as someone that gets to look out, survey the land, see everything that's happening, and has a perspective on things that we on the ground may not be able to see or feel. It gives the speaker an omniscient point of view in a way that's kind of leaning towards a godlike figure, but also by using the collective we, addressing all of us, including the speaker becomes part of the struggling people, is one of the Black community in this case, that is going through these things but has enough perspective to say, hang tight, things will get better. Thank you so much for tuning in today to Black Poets Then and Now. It has been so much fun looking at the work of Countee Cullen, revisiting his historical legacy. I look forward to seeing you next week for more poetry. Until then, stay safe and stay creative. Bye!